So the webinar started. We've
Yeah.
got Natalie's with us. Hi, Natalie. What Natalie doesn't understand yet is this is an AMA for Phil, but Phil quite often diverts the question to everyone who's attending.
So you're warning Natalie to be prepared.
I am, yeah. Phil, if you're happy, why don't we get started?
That sounds good.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining, and thank you anyone that is listening to this. Just whilst we are waiting for people to join in, please put in chat where you're from and what you would like to discuss today. And as always, this is a great opportunity to put Phil Squire, the CEO of Consalia, under a bit of pressure and to leverage his knowledge of all things sales related.
I think this is your favorite thing of the month, isn't it, Will?
I do enjoy it. I do. We've only got one announcement that my colleague Eddie is making sure I announce. We were so thrilled with those who attended and contributed to the discussion at our Leading Sales Transformation Masterclass with Axel Ferrioles, all around the topic of transformation. And I just wanted to announce that we got another one lined up. This will be with Grant Van Albrecht. He is also a master. He's done the Leading Sales Transformation Masters. He's gone on to do the ILM in Coaching for Sales Transformation and continued on to do a doctorate in change management. But Grant will be doing a masterclass in change management on the 31st of July. So if you're interested, do let us know. I know Eddie will be providing further details, but these are really exciting sessions where we focus on a topic, an area in sales leadership, and we get our alumni to run a masterclass session on it. And they're very interactive, very engaging. So I highly recommend people join. Plus, you get a sense of what happens in our master's programs. Anyway, I digress. Let's not waste any more time and get straight into it. So we've been sent a couple of questions through to us via email. So we'll get round to those. But if anyone else has any questions in chat, or just let us know and I'll make sure Phil addresses it. Natalie, this is a brilliant opportunity for you to kind of put Phil under the spotlight. And I can see that Ian Jones has joined us again from South Africa. So welcome in and thank you so much. And thanks for the question you sent us, because it's really helpful to get them in advance. So why don't we start with Ian's question? Actually,
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. So Ian wrote in and said, many sales leaders have been addressing the problem of their salespeople failing to make targets. They've been trying to solve the problem by several methods over a long time with little or no success. A cynical attitude is in evidence and suggests that the problem cannot be solved in the current time frame for a variety of reasons. Is there a proof of the Consalia concept that you would recommend that is relatively quick and inexpensive to implement?
So yeah, Ian, thanks very much for that question. It's a really great question to ask, and I think the first bit of the question is perhaps worth reflecting on, which is this comment about failing to make targets. And I think it'd be interesting for us to talk about, what the percentages actually look like, before I maybe move on to the second part of the question. So the question I think we should look at first of all is, or check the validity of the statement about failing to meet targets, is what percentage of salespeople in a selling organization meet targets. and what percentage don't, because that, if we disagree with what the figures are, then that's going to influence the second half of the statement. But the data that we've got on this topic is that over 60% of salespeople fail to meet targets on an annual basis. And one of the interesting aspects of this particular statistic is that with the same organizations, this is something that happens year in, year out. And that would potentially suggest that they build into their planning process the assumption that 60% of salespeople are going to fail, to reach targets. Therefore, that assumption drives the number of people that they need to recruit into sales to meet targets, because these same companies have a knack of kind of just about reaching their targets year in, year out. So I think that's interesting. So I suppose it would be a question that I could sort of put back to Ian, who asked the question at this stage, is what Ian's experience has been in this particular area. I don't know if Ian is happy to kind of share his point of view on that.
Yeah. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Ian.
Absolutely happy to do that. We have a couple of organizations that I know about here in South Africa who have been doing what I've described. They've been trying to address this problem that the majority of their salespeople aren't making target. And they've tried a variety of methodologies, including the one that you just talked about, of hiring more salespeople in the mistaken belief that if you can spread the organization's target over more people, there is a greater possibility of the overall target being achieved.
Yeah.
And it seems as though, certainly in the two cases that I've got in mind, a cynicism to the point of saying, right, we're going to build into our targets for into our budgets for 2023, the reality that only 40% of our salespeople are going to make target, and somewhere around 60% are going to be between 20 and 30% short. And we'll just acknowledge that that is a fact going forward. So our forecasting will reflect the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in. And we tried so many remedies, say they, to this situation that maybe it's because of coming back out of lockdown, maybe they've got a variety of reasons that they're conjuring with as to why this thing seems to be so intractable, which is what led me to the question that says, is there any way that we could prove the Consalia concept in a way that isn't going to take them an enormous amount of time and a great deal of money, so that they would be drawn into persuading themselves that there was a solution to the problem that they confront.
Do you mind if I just come on to that last question just a bit later?
Sure.
Because I think the implications of the stats as we see them, and you've sort of confirmed similar experiences in South Africa, is quite significant in terms of what does this approach do for the general sort of morale and motivation of a sales organization when so many of the sales organizations sort of fail to reach their targets? Or is it in the psyche of salespeople that this fear of failure to reach target actually spurs more effort into producing sales results, therefore more sort of likelihood that they'll reach targets? I'm not sure, but I think it'd be interesting to perhaps have Natalie's point of view on this as well. Natalie, if you don't mind kind of sharing what some of your experiences have been in a sales enablement role in your previous companies. What percentage figures did you or have you experienced with the organizations that you've worked for, Natalie, in terms of attainment of sales targets?
So I think probably the last couple of organizations I've worked in, it's been around, I would say probably the 60% mark.
Okay.
And I think there's always been a consistent sort of challenge in getting the sales reps to really adhere to the best practices, sharing what it is that we've observed that's worked and really getting them to implement those things. And that, even though sometimes you might not think it's, or it doesn't seem like rocket science some of the time, it does still seem that salespeople tend to fall into the same old bad habits, maybe. And there is that need for that continual repetition to try and get them to do those things that we know that work. Yeah.
So that's still, whether it's 60 or 40, there's still high, a high percentage of salespeople who, from your experience as well, sort of don't reach their targets. And
no,
I mean, so some of it, it is based on, let's talk about incentives for a bit. I know we've spoken on this topic sort of earlier on, but if you've got a sales manager who's targeted on achieving a certain figure and he achieves that through, 10, let's say 10 people that report into him, and he achieves that target with 4 people, does he really care about what happens to the other 6? So quite a number of systems that I've seen, and this is back to your question, Ian, about, is there a proof of the Consalia concept that we would recommend? Could there be, could one look at the way in which sales leaders are remunerated so that their remuneration is based on the numbers, percentage-wise, numbers of salespeople who hit or exceed quota rather than the figure in its own right? So I think that, I know that question has sometimes come up in conversations we've had with clients, is that, would you drive a better balanced performance if the way that the sales managers are incentivized is based on percentage of team who meet quota rather than just a simple revenue or gross profit quota? I don't know, Ian, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, whether these companies have got such systems that reward sales leaders in the way that I've just described, or is your experience that sales leaders tend to be kind of remunerated on one figure and the companies don't really care about how that figure's arrived at as long as you hit the figure?
Yeah, I think that latter form of remuneration is prevalent in South Africa. What is starting to happen now, of course, is that the organization's ability to meet target is being impacted.
Yeah.
So instead of the organization meeting target, it sort of meets 80% of the target. And that sort of winds up being a contest between executive management and sales management, where sales management is saying, you are placing unrealistic targets on us. And executive management say, well, whether they seem reasonable to you or not, this is what the business requires. And it sort of continues to be that non-resolving nature of discussion between executive management and sales management. And I was wondering, Phil, if the reality is not to be, in terms of fixing the problem, is not to be found in some research that I know you have already done.
Yeah.
That 90% of salespeople are not attractive to their customers. Now, I'm wondering whether if that issue were effectively addressed, it might have a relatively short-term improvement in the numbers.
Yeah, no, thank you for kind of referring to the research that we've done. And I think that could definitely sort of play into this. Is a relatively quick and inexpensive way to implement some sort of change in sales performance. But I just want to come back to the management angle to begin with, because I think so many of these issues are to do not just with the mindset of the selling organization, but the mindset of the manager. And we have got examples of some of our students who have inherited a poor performing sales teams selling in a market which is tough, and where the performance across all of the salespeople have not only exceeded target, but exceeded target by a percentage that enables those salespeople to go to winner's circle. And this has been achieved, and this is maybe part of the answer that we could sort of talk about in terms of this proof of concept. This has been achieved by a sales leader who has an absolute passion about the way that they want to be recognized as a leader. So they want to be recognized as a leader, not just by getting one person in the team, sort of hitting the sales targets to achieve, his overall team target, but every single person in the team doing the same. So they do not regard themselves as a great leader unless all the people cross the line, and hopefully some of those people crossing the line extraordinarily well. So I think a lot of it starts with with vision, the vision of the sales leader, and then I think it's linked to a topic that I know, Ian, that you're really passionate about, which is coaching, and it's actually looking at how it's having a frame of mind and a mindset driven around recognizing people's potential, and then having a powerful coaching concept methodology in order to coach the individuals through all of the different activities needed to maximize sales performance. So this combination of a personal vision coupled with coaching support and ability are two incredibly important factors at a management level. And then I think you mentioned, Ian, the research that we've done around selling mindsets. I mean, we've seen some extraordinary improvements in performance by salespeople adopting, the 4 winning mindsets as we've defined it, and over a period of time, depending on the sales cycle of the client, producing extraordinary performance, whether it's in a quarter or whether it's over a 2-year period. So yes, I mean, we would recommend a culture in a sales organization that's built around the 4 differentiating mindsets of authenticity, client centricity, proactive creativity, and tactful audacity, coupled with a manager who has a vision to really want every single person in the team, to perform well with exceptional coaching skills. I think that combination is an ideal combination to maximize performance and hopefully sort of increase the stats in favor of 100% of salespeople meeting quota. So yes, we have got evidence, we have got published case studies to that effect. Do I see Will about to ask a question? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I was just gonna, because I know the sort of case study you're talking about.
Yeah.
And one of the approaches the sales leader took was he spent quite a bit of time researching where the activity of his sales team was being spent. And I think, Phil, I was going to ask you the question around the importance of understanding what are the activities that contribute towards a healthy pipeline, because that's also something this sales leader did.
Yeah, he did such a
maybe
great job on it. And it's interesting when things aren't going well. You said you tend to go down to the sort of, what's the root cause of, why is it that we're not actually sort of hitting targets? And so in the absence of results, you can't look at results. You've simply got to look at, well, what is the team doing? And yes, he did a lot of quite sort of forensic work in asking the sort of sales team to track the activities that they were doing and to whom, and what level of the organization are these people kind of selling to, what kind of discussions are going on with the people that they have been meeting, and what were the outcomes of those discussions. So his conversations were very much based on what did you do, who did you do it with, and what was the outcome. So there were just 3 simple things that he asked each of the salespeople day in, week out, in order to understand the correlation between activity and result. So he wasn't interested in results. Well, results weren't there. He was simply focused on what we refer to as leading indicators that would lead to results later. So this kind of analysis of activity was another, thanks for raising the question, Will, or the point, was another factor that he looked at, because it linked very much with coaching. How do you know how to coach people, when you don't have a deep understanding of what it is that they do? And we often find when we're talking to sales managers on the master's programs that we run, is when they start to talk about sort of the cadence of coaching, and it's very much linked to sort of quarterly pipeline, and they very much get all forecasts and perhaps pipeline. Forecast meaning what do they forecast in current quarter versus pipeline, maybe more future looking. But it's quite clear that the majority of conversations that take place is around what we would call lagging indicators. And I think this is a big mistake, and leads to the fact that people lose sight of what it is they need to do to generate results. They get fixated on the performance. But in a way, you can't blame the sales managers, about doing this, because they get pushed and shoveled around performance all the time by their senior execs. So they're given, if you like, the culture of the organization and the things that get discussed at those sort of QBR meetings that are so results orientated that there's no real emphasis in looking at what it is that drives results. So I don't know if I've rambled on a bit. So yeah, Ian, I think it's a combination of the selling mindsets. So we've got so much evidence to show that if salespeople adopt these selling mindsets, they will be in what we've called the winner circle, and much higher probabilities of closing opportunities. But I don't think we can underestimate either the importance of the role of the sales manager and the sales leadership, to provide the right coaching support for them as well.
And it's also providing the right space for innovation and to take risk and have that supportive element from the leadership. Because if you're doing the same thing over and over again and not getting the results, then perhaps you need to find new ways to innovate.
Yeah, for sure. It's really, really important to encourage that psychological safety, for people to experiment and try new things out. I remember we had one of the stories that I really love is we had a group of managers going on the Sales Transformation Masters program, and one of the managers, he was based in Colombia, and he was confronted with a big challenge. He worked for Sony Mobile. Of course, they had a huge amount of competition from the other handset suppliers, and the regulators in Colombia were trying to block the sale of smartphones because they felt that economically it wasn't good for the country. And they wanted to make the accessibility of smartphones more, the lower end handsets, so that, more of the population could buy them. And this would have had a disastrous effect on the Sony market share. And so what he did, and this happened within a 3-month period, was he adopted the proactive creativity and tactful audacity mindset. And he went back to the regulators and he challenged them on the logic of the regulations that they were about to implement, throughout the country. It took a lot of courage to be able to go to the regulators and say, hang on, I think you've made a mistake here. Can I have some of your time to rethink this? And he'd done a lot of work on looking at the economic ROI, and such that the regulators agreed that they wouldn't block the sale of high-end smartphones. And as these conversations were going on with Sony and the regulators, Sony preempted the fact that they would not introduce this legislation, and that the market would be open for the sale of these smartphone handsets. So they stocked up, they had the stock ready, they entered the Christmas period, which is the biggest opportunity for handset sales is over the Christmas period. And the other handset manufacturers had depleted their stock of handsets, so they didn't have any stock, or much less stock. And within the space of 2 or 3 months, Sony increased their market share in Colombia from something like 8 to 17%. And this was done based on taking those mindsets that we know so much about of tactful audacity and proactive creativity, and implementing it in a sales approach. But I love this story because of its innovation, inventiveness, courage, and of course business impact was amazing. Yeah, and of course it's been published in the Journal of Sales Transformation.
Great, Ian. I'm just wondering if Phil's answered your question, or if you have any other questions for him.
No, I think, Will, that Phil has given me a very comprehensive exposure on what you guys have found that works. And I'm sure that the elements that he's outlined are the ones that need attention. And it so inspired me that I'd like to put together a kind of a straw man suggestion based upon the information that he's given this afternoon. And maybe that's something that offline I and you guys could work on going forward.
Yeah,
that would be brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ian. We'd love that.
Okay.
I don't know if
Thanks.
Natalie has got any more comments to add or any observations.
or any questions.
Or any questions.
I haven't got a question at the moment. I thought it was interesting what you were saying actually about the teams and whether you know all of the teams should be performing and hitting quota for the sales managers and leaders to really feeling like they're succeeding. And that's something from the sales enablement perspective that I always saw as very important actually, is how do you upskill everybody in the team rather than just those top performers, so that you can help make the whole team more effective. So I know that was something I definitely always had in my mind, is what can we do from an enablement perspective to make sure that we are upskilling the performance of the whole team, and also that focus on the frontline managers, you know, how important that is in terms of really enabling them and giving them the coaching skills that they need to be able to pass that on to their teams. And that, I think, is something that I've observed is becoming much more important in the senior exec's mind, is how can we make sure that our frontline managers are really ready to step up into that coaching role, especially where they've come maybe from they've been promoted up through the individual contributors up into that next role of manager, and as we know, they're very different skill sets needed for those two roles. So how can they really develop those managers when they get into that role to make sure that they can do their jobs effectively, and also that they're developing them then as well to stay within the company and to grow, and do what they want to do in their next career steps. So I think, it's valuable for all round really to make sure that those managers have the coaching and development that they need.
I mean, there's some interesting research by by Gartner on the amount of time that managers spend coaching, and they sort of segregated star managers versus sort of average managers in their analysis. And one of the things that they found was both these groups of managers tend to spend the same amount of time actually coaching. But what is different between the two is that the star managers spend their time differently to the average managers, and the area that they spend more time in coaching is around early stage sales development, sales opportunities, and if we're looking at more sort of deal specific type coaching, and as well as late stage. And this has always struck a note with me, because I remember doing one of our interviews of customers about, we're interviewing the customers of our customer about what they like and dislike about sales approaches. And one of the people that we interviewed said, they really dislike it when managers come in at the end of a deal to get what they said the glory of closing the deal and to negotiate, and they could go back to the office talking about how they won the opportunity, and sort of in a way usurping the authority of the salesperson in that respect, in terms of what they can and cannot do in the negotiation. But so I think coaching is such an important sort of area, and so when you break it down into, okay, well, coaching is one thing, but what type of coaching is important, and so much of what we do here at Consalia is sort of is exploring around coaching to the mindsets. How can you coach people such that the sales team have the kind of what we know to be the winning mindsets for being successful? Because I think if the mindsets are in the right place, it's amazing what you can do on the back of that. So yeah, thanks for talking about coaching. I think that's really important.
And just when you were talking about the sales process there, so with my last company I worked at was really where they were struggling to progress was really in that discovery phase. So I think that was a continual area for support and coaching from enablement, and also for the managers on, really doing that part effectively. And again, I think that just comes up time and time again, doesn't it? And maybe how you can apply those mindsets to your discovery process to really make sure that you are doing it as effectively as possible. But that was something that the data definitely backed up, was that it just wasn't being done as thoroughly as it needed to be to progress on to the next stage.
Great. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Natalie.
Thank you. So Phil, I'm now digging into our archive, because we've had questions in the past that we haven't had the time to address. This one is around transformation. So how long does it typically take to transform a sales force? My organization wants, that's a meaty one. My organization wants results, but may not necessarily have the patience to transform. How would you approach this conversation with the executive team?
I think a lot of it depends on the size of the organization, because there's no question that the larger the organization, the bigger the challenge there is in achieving transformation. And the bigger a company gets, the less agile they become, even though that we know how important agility is in today's marketplace. And I think we've talked on these AMA sessions before about what percentage of people do you need to have in an organization that that is behind a transformative idea and have totally bought into it. And McKinsey have come out with a 7% figure, which is quite interesting. So I think it depends a little bit on the size of the organization. We have got examples of people who have needed to effect a complete transformation of the sales force, with teams of around 30, 45 people, with a number of field sales managers reporting into them. And we have seen transformation taking place over a 90-day period. And the difficulty with transformation, or what makes it a challenge, is that before you can really get into any kind of specific actions that take place, if you like, is you need to win hearts and minds. And unless you win the hearts and minds of the sales team around a different way of approaching the marketplace, there's very little you can do. The team won't transform. They'll go back to business as usual. So the critical thing is winning hearts and minds around, the purpose of the organization, a very clear idea about exactly, what it is you're asking the teams to do, and why is that called transformation and not change. So assuming that the transformation is required, then at an individual level, I think it can happen quite quickly. But at a team level, it really depends on its size. Now, I've seen situations where sort of organizations might have a sales force of 2,000 or 3,000, and they've got pockets of teams inside that organization who are clearly transforming, and where the results of those pockets of the organization are being recognized inside the organization for having transformed. Yet trying to scale that from the 200 or 300s to the 2,000 or 3,000s, does take time. So I think it's a question of size and perhaps urgency. Perhaps it's the compelling, if you've got a compelling event that suggests, you've absolutely got to change or else the company's going to go bust or whatever it might be, then you're going to have people far more receptive to the idea of transformation than not. But even so, even with that compelling need for change, I mean, look at Nokia. They had 45% of the handset market, and then they lost that 45%. I think they have maybe 2 or 3% now. Have they been able to change? Well, they knew the avalanche was coming, but they weren't able to affect transformation. It's very difficult to actually change deeply embedded systems quickly. So I think that's it depends answer, Will, which is not very maybe helpful.
Maybe you could touch on winning hearts and minds, and what's maybe less of a transformation, but if you as a manager say want to implement change, winning hearts and minds is quite tricky. And I'm wondering, through your experience, how you would have gone around winning hearts and minds to embed sort of behavioral change.
I mean, I think it has to be, to some extent it has to a large extent be a collaborative process, and it typically starts in sort of Kotter fashion, in a way, where you've got a number of people in a quote guiding coalition who've come together to to talk about the requirement for transformation and can see that it's much needed. And between those limited number of people, to define a process to win the hearts and minds of the others inside the organization. And I use the word collaborative because if you go in with this is what I think we need to do to transform, and with this team of 2 others, let's say, that you've got behind that vision, I think you could sort of run into a sort of slightly cynical pushback from the others in the organization. I think what's interesting is that you sometimes see a time lag between the what might be a perfectly good transitional strategy and the execution in the field, because of the underestimation of the time it takes to actually bring people with you. So we've, one of the techniques we've seen people use to win hearts and minds is something we call appreciative inquiry. And it's a very positive way of actually dream designing and then implementing a particular sort of course of, sort of creating a new destiny, designing a new system to fulfill the destiny, towards building a course of action. And this is very energizing, and it's something that we often recommend people who want to go through this journey of transformation. So it's Cooper Ryder, who is the author of Appreciative Inquiry. It's just a fantastic, very simple framework for actually getting people to come together and to create a future state, building on the best of what is best. So it's a very nice way of looking at sort of problem solving, but it does win hearts and minds in a very positive way. So yes, there are various tools and techniques that one could use to actually help an organization structure a process towards transformational change.
Great, thank you. And one last question.
Okay.
I think you've been under the spotlight now.
I have. Yeah, I seem to have done slightly more talking on this one than previous.
I know. But yeah, you'll be relieved to know it's just one more question, and it's 73% of millennials are now reported to have decision-making responsibilities. How should salespeople adapt their selling practices for this new generation?
Yes, it's very interesting because when we spoke about this sort of slightly early on today, and I think, what do I think about that? And it's sort of making me feel very old, when we start to define which is the age bracket. And that I was actually, there's an awful lot of data, isn't there, coming out now about this particular genre of decision making process, and their sort of preferences are not to sort of, they like to do a lot of their own research. They don't want so much engagement with sellers. And I think for a lot of transactions, which are transactions or transactional sales, this may be true. This is where kind of sales is heading. But for the complex sale, it's important, for both the supplier and the buyers to get together. And I think millennials who are not used to this notion of collaboration, partnership, if they're not used to this notion of exploring innovation through the suppliers that they have, are kind of missing a trick. And the projects may fail as a consequence of that. But I may be a bit old-fashioned in my thinking on this, but I think the world is moving so fast and so quickly that no one has the answers. And I think that it's kind of, in a way, sort of the millennial question suggests that the millennial know what the right answer is to a particular problem that they've got. And they're going out and sort of doing the research to validate their hypothesis. And this runs a risk of the innovation you can get through a much more partner-orientated dialogue with salespeople. But I may be showing my age here, Will, and I may be wrong in what I've just shared with you, but this is my sense.
I mean, time will tell, I think.
Time will tell.
Is the answer.
But I think the
yes,
pandemic, I think that also, just to sort of carry on, I'm finding myself hearing more and more people talking about the need for face-to-face meetings, and that we still haven't got over this sort of pandemic-induced not seeing customers, or customers not seeing potential suppliers. And there's no doubt that, with all the Zoom technology we have and Teams technology, we can be more productive, by not spending so much time traveling. But in spite of that, we're still getting people regretting the fact that they're not spending enough face-to-face time with customers as well. So that's just an observation. This is not based on any scientific research, apart from us talking to hundreds of salespeople, and also to customers about similar topics.
I'll just add to that. Doesn't, regardless of the generational dynamic, we're all humans at the end of the day, and we all enjoy social interaction.
Absolutely.
And it's far more fun creating relationships with your customers and potentially other sellers. That we should be advocates of connecting and seeing each other face to face, and utilizing all the channels at our disposal at the moment.
So what about setting up a sales performance system which rewards the amount of money salespeople are spending on client lunches?
How do you see that working?
Well, say we're going to pay you a commission, for
plus a free lunch.
Plus a free lunch. Yeah.
I like it. Yeah.
So is this some of the innovation that we might see in sales performance systems? I'm not sure what Natalie would make of that at all, but
Great idea.
you think it's a good idea?
I do
Yeah.
think it's a good idea, and I think people, I think it is about that balance, isn't it? That people are starting to get back out there and having those face-to-face meetings, and I think a lot of people do want to do that. But I guess companies are very conscious as well of the amount of money they can save on, T&E and all of those sorts of things
Absolutely.
now with Zoom and all the other tools we have at our disposal. But no, I agree with you both. I think it'd be nice to be able to get back to that more face-to-face, in-person interaction.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Natalie, for joining us. And Phil, thank you so much for your time and for this session. I hope it was
a
enjoyable
great pleasure
for everyone.
It is. Yeah, looking forward to the next one. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Will, and Ian and Natalie for joining us as well. It's been brilliant.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.